Right, okay. Should we get started then? Right, okay. So, thank you very much for everybody for coming to the first in our MedTech Innovation Series. Before I introduce our speaker today, I will just quickly explain what the aim of this series is. So, we're trying to get people from a very broad range of different to get you perspectives from people across a very broad range of healthcare and medical technology backgrounds. It's designed to be a very relaxed format, so talkers haven't been asked to bring data or anything like that, like a normal formal lecture series would be. And then there's time afterwards for people to chat and stuff. So it's hopefully going to be quite relaxed. The idea as well is to try and build a bit of a MedTech community across the university. So including students and staff, so it's good that we've got both students and staff here. Range of backgrounds, so we've got clinicians here today, which is great, engineers, academics, business people, so we've got a nice range in the room, which is great. And this is also in anticipation of our new MSc starting, our new MSc in Medical Technology, Innovation and Design. So hopefully the students on that will be coming into here and benefiting from this community as well. So that's the idea. Some people involved in supporting the event. So we have Cheryl, who did the beer run. We have Cam, who ponied up for the pizzas. We have Igor, who's on director duty. So he is going to be behind the camera. So these will be filmed and we'll put them online. I haven't made the page yet, but I shall soon make a page for this series, and the talks will go up on there, and so will the schedule. Sarah, who's done a lot of the organising and is doing the organising now, I think, out there somewhere, getting some pizzas. Yeah, she's ordering the pizzas that Cam ponied up for. And then Matt, who has been helping out with promoting the event and will be wandering about with a camera, taking pictures of people for social media. If you do not want to be photographed, then please let Matt know. And he will not photograph you. Finally, just some upcoming speakers we have. So this is the next three speakers we have. So we have Maggie, who some of you may know because she was here a few years ago. So she's going to be talking about what she's done since she was here, which is set up an audiology clinic in Jordan, and also she's starting up the first newborn hearing screening program there as well. So she's done an amazing amount in a very short amount of time and with a lot of barriers, as you can possibly imagine, doing that in Jordan. So I think that's going to be really good. Then we've got very different Bruce, his career was in marketing for MedTech companies. So in advising them on how to sell their products, basically, and try and convince clinicians to buy their medical technology. Maybe interesting, particularly to some implant service people who presumably get a load of reps trying to sell them junk at various times. So you all know how they should be selling you that stuff. And then Alan Sanderson, who, again, some of you may know because he was here a few years ago. He'll be talking about work he's been doing delivering hearing technology for children with glue ear in Malawi and some other places in Africa. So that's an idea of some of the talkers coming up. But today, and I will not touch your laptop, today we have Steve, who I first saw talk probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was a very impactful talk. He, as you'll see, paints a very vivid picture of some of the issues that children have, particularly with deaf children have across the world. And he's doing some amazing work with the charity he founded, DeafKidz International, in trying to reduce some of the issues that they're having. I will say no more because Steve is going to tell you all about it. And I hopefully, with this press of the button, we'll switch to Steve's slides. Yeah, there you go. And we have Steve Crump.
Thank you very much, Mark. Always a pleasure to be here in Southampton to trek out west from Sin City, Brighton. And it's a privilege to be delivering the first of your MedTech lectures. A little bit of background. I lost my hearing in my youth in the 80s as a result of military service. Then fell into the deaf community and deaf culture as I learned to use my hearing aid, learned to lip read, learned to engage with deaf people and hearing people in a new way, shape and form. Furthered my understanding of the deaf community, deaf culture, the experience of the deaf world through, for example, volunteering on Sense holidays where I first met Helen 200 years ago, and more. I then found myself working in humanitarian response and for a long time for an organisation that clears landmines and unexploded ordnance, the Mines Advisory Group. That experience led me to join the board of an organisation called War Child that works to respond to the needs of children affected by conflict, and in particular to broker partnership with the music industry to raise funds for War Child's vital work. And one day the team at War Child came to me and said, we found a school for the deaf in Mali, I think it was, where the deaf children are being routinely raped, abused by the militias, the fighting forces and so on. What do we do? I said, I have no idea. What do we do? And I felt then, as a deafened man, that I had a responsibility to find out what was going on and how we could build a response that was appropriate to the needs of those children, that protected them, and more. Bottle of red wine one Friday night, wrote a quick concept note to Comic Relief, and asked for a small grant to fund a research exercise to look at the protection and safeguarding needs of deaf children in South Africa, a country that I have had some experience of. And that was granted, and that small piece of work found that the abuse and exploitation of deaf children in South Africa was endemic. From those beginnings, DeafKidz International was born. So what I'm looking to do this evening rather, is take you through what we do, how we do it, and some learning and some points to note for your good selves as professionals working in healthcare. There'll be a tick test at the end to make sure you got it all, okay? So in your work, a deaf young girl presents bruises, stares, won't engage, seems fearful. If you're working with them in an audiological context, perhaps is not getting support from their family with the use of the hearing aid and all the rest of it, something's going on there. Perhaps using inappropriate sexual language. What are you going to do? What are you going to do when that young person sat in front of you?
Oh, you want answers?
Go on.
Okay.
Go on.
Well, we have safeguarding things. We'd ring a MASH team.
Mm-hmm.
We'd know everything. Depending on how far, how much evidence you've got in front of you, you start to build a picture or you refer straight.
Okay, good. Thank you. What are you going to do? Good, well done. I think the challenge for you, for us, and for DeafKidz is, how will you ensure that deaf children are safe? Do you have the confidence to disclose suspected abuse if you see it? I mean, clearly you're then going down, as you've just described, a considerable pathway. You've got to have the confidence to pursue that pathway. So you've got to be able to address what you sometimes see, which is, oh, really, we're going to do this. Do you know what I mean? So have you got the confidence to disclose? Have you read local safeguarding policies and such like, as, again, you just mentioned? How will you ensure that your concerns are followed through? So let's have a think about that over the next half an hour. That's a challenge for you. As professionals working in healthcare, engaging with children that perhaps you suspect have been abused in some way, shape or form. So from those beginnings, way back, 2013, the work that DeafKidz undertaken from that research exercise in South Africa that then led to programmatic work in South Africa, in Jamaica, in Pakistan, and more. What we found through the evidence that we've collected over the years is that deaf children experience endemic stigma, discrimination, abuse and exploitation. And indeed, 1 in 4 deaf girls experience sexual abuse. And in many cases, those children have never actually, in low resource settings, clearly that's where we work, have never actually been diagnosed as deaf. Instead, they're seen as stupid, retarded, dare I say. So, you know, it's acceptable to abuse them because negative attitudes and ignorance legitimizes the abuse. So it's okay, they won't tell, nobody, they're worthless. And, you know, what we've also found, our evidence is that global child protection frameworks have failed deaf children. And indeed, that's how our partnership, a significant partnership with the UNICEF-funded Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children commenced, because I booked a ticket to New York, my own expense, walked into their offices in downtown Manhattan and said, the work you're doing, UNICEF, the work you're doing is great, but it's failing deaf children. You need to include deaf children in your work. 20% of the global population experiences some form of disability, and deafness is the 3rd largest disability globally, but the least resource. What you're doing is null and void unless you include the needs of deaf children. And they said, we'll do something about that. So, you know, global child protection frameworks, UNICEF, SAVE, have failed deaf children, and that needs to be redressed. And that's the evidence that we have accumulated over the years. So, the organisation that I founded and which is now working globally is, you know, very simply the leading global agency responding to the protection and safeguarding needs of deaf children and young people. It's deaf-led. The board, the staff team are deaf leaders working with other hearing professionals. We work to foster the integration of deaf and hearing, and we're a total communication organisation. So if you're working in deafness with deaf people, please sign, learn to sign. Good. Don't disappoint me, come on. We work to reduce the stigma and discrimination associated with deafness, and as I was saying earlier, you know, in some of the geographies and cultures that we work, deafness is seen as, you know, is seen as a result of some misdemeanor in a previous life or such like. So we work to address that stigma. We're digital in approach, using digital technology to inform, to promote and enthuse, to progress learning. And we look very simply to empower and resource deaf children to succeed, which is why our leaders are deaf, which is why we say to deaf children, you can be who you want, you can be successful, have your dreams, you can be safe, and so on. So that's DeafKidz International, based in Brighton in terms of the sort of registered office, but all operations are run out of Durban in South Africa. Why are deaf children vulnerable? Let's have a little think about that. As I mentioned earlier, 3rd largest disability globally, but it's the least resourced. There's stigma and taboo. In some cultures, shame and embarrassment about deafness. You know, it's some past sin, so it's okay to punch, kick, neglect and abuse. And indeed, in one geography, I've certainly seen deaf children pushed into a back room, kind of chained up and just left there because the family are embarrassed about them and don't want them to be seen by other members of the community. Deaf children may be seen as worthless and therefore denied access to communication, education and health. And indeed, if you go back to the point I was making at the beginning, that in some cases we found that deaf children have not actually been diagnosed as deaf, then if you don't know they're deaf, how do you refer them on to any specialist education, if there is any? That's a considerable challenge. Communication barriers lead to frustration, and what we found in many instances is that deaf children are born to hearing parents who don't know the child is deaf, don't quite know what's going on, don't learn to communicate, and you know, when their child doesn't respond or they get frustrated, punch, kick, or, you know, as we've seen, the family member that thinks they can get away with it, sexual abuse. And you'd be surprised how widespread that is. And again, you know, that physical abuse is often condoned within the community because they've done something bad in the last life. And we've seen that in rural South Africa, in parts of Pakistan, in parts of Zambia. It's endemic. And of course, poverty also makes deaf children vulnerable to abuse and exploitation. And what we've found increasingly in our work of late is that deaf children in low-resource countries, developing countries, do go online, do access online content, and of course, that's where they're vulnerable to grooming, to cyber bullying and so on. But also, and we have seen this, parents push their children online to perform sexual acts for money. So somebody in the US is you know, paying a young deaf person in South Africa to perform a sexual act online, and their parents are pushing them into that because they need the money. Poverty. And again, you know, deaf children are vulnerable because if you haven't acquired language, if you haven't been to school per se, if you haven't understood what's going on around you, you don't actually know what's right, what's wrong, what's abuse, what isn't. And what's been particularly interesting with some work that we did in South Africa is that we found that deaf young men were perpetrating sexual abuse on other deaf young men, often younger than themselves, because they didn't know it was wrong. They hadn't experienced socialization, you know, what is deemed as socially acceptable, and so it was, you know, fine to sexually abuse another male, sometimes within the family and sometimes outside. And indeed, one of the sort of signature moments to me when we did that initial research way back in South Africa was speaking to a paediatrician who said to me, I saw 3 young deaf girls last week, all aged under 5, that had been raped by the same family member. So, you know, because the perpetrator felt they could get away with it, the children couldn't communicate, the family were just dismissing, you know, the situation. So this is why deaf children are vulnerable, and this is why we need to deliver the response that we do. Talk about a little bit more about online abuse, and what we have seen over the years is that deaf children are particularly vulnerable to cyberbullying, to sexting, which is, you know, obviously the transmission of texts which have sexual content. Send me a picture, send me of yourself naked and all the rest of it. Grooming, perform a sexual act for me, or even come offline and meet me somewhere. And we've seen this especially in South Africa, where there's been a digital explosion. You know, in sub-Saharan Africa, everybody's got a phone actually, you know, and the online community is booming. Poverty, as mentioned earlier, but also if you haven't got language as a young deaf person, as a child, you've been marginalised within the family, within the community, you feel worthless, you're pushed online. You spend a lot of time online because nobody questions you there, nobody challenges you there. And obviously, as a young person growing up, you have curiosity, you will look around the web and you will be found, or some children are certainly found, and that's when grooming occurs. Loneliness, again, as mentioned, an inability to disclose abuse, and a failure of existing online protection initiatives to be inclusive. Big tech at the moment, Meta, TikTok, and more, are coming together to address sort of the protection needs of deaf children in the developed world, if I can call it that, Europe, North America, and so on. We've been party to some of that work through the offices of the We Protect Global Alliance, making sure that their work's inclusive, but generally none of the work that's been undertaken to protect children online thinks about the needs of deaf children. And when you think about deaf children, it actually includes disabled children as well, because the challenges here of being lonely, spending extensive time online, also relate and relay to children with other disabilities. So we have found ourselves variously talking to agencies and providers and saying, actually, these are the principles around deaf children, but it also relates to disabled. And the other challenge that we have to address online is that there are indeed some adults with a sexual interest in children who specifically seek out deaf and disabled children for gratification. And indeed, what we have found in our work is that there's a commercial market for this material. People buy. Parents is one I want to emphasise, because as I said earlier, in many instances, the parents don't understand the intricacies of deafness, have not even realised their children are deaf as opposed to something else, have not learned any basic communication skills with which to communicate with their children, don't understand or can't afford or don't know what to do with a hearing aid and all that comes with that. So, gently empowering parents to communicate, to love and embrace rather than reject, kick, punch is a key part of what we do. And it's been interesting to see the progress that we've made in that respect, particularly in Jamaica, where we funded over several years Jamaican Sign Language Level 1 for parents of deaf children, sort of parenting groups, and suddenly the parents were going, okay, well, it's okay to be the parent of a deaf child. Yeah, it is. I can make a difference with my deaf child. Yeah. They can grow up and be who they want to be. Yeah. I can assert for them within the family unit and say, stop, don't do that, in terms of what we do see, which is, abuse within the family. So the work with parents has been particularly notable. Our key intervention in terms of empowering deaf children to be safe in themselves but also online is DeafKidz Defenders. And at the end of this, before we do the TIC test, I'll show you a short video of DeafKidz Defenders. So it's not all death by me talking, okay? And this is a PC game aimed at empowering deaf children to be safe online. It basically comprises superhero characters that deaf children can, become. They jump through a whole series of games which have been designed by the best and the greatest in the games industry, where they learn, for example, this is my body, don't touch, private parts, keeping secrets, to online grooming and cyberbullying. We've trialled it in South Africa and Pakistan, and it's been very successful, and it's now scaling into Zambia. And what we found is that deaf children respond to the imagery, respond to the games, like to be superheroes. Behaviours are changed, information's retained, and the games, as you'll see from the short video, there's no audio. It's very visual. It's easy to play. And, you can create your own deaf character, put your own yellow hearing aids in or white hearing aids, whatever you want to do. And suddenly the deaf young child goes, oh, I'm a superhero. I'm getting invested into, I'm being who I want to be. Great. So DeafKidz Defenders. And what we found from evaluation exercises has been that in Pakistan and South Africa, 91% of the children that have played the games said that they had increased their knowledge of risk and susceptibility. Yeah, actually, I am at risk, and if I go online, I could be groomed, so I need to be careful. 56% of the deaf children who participated in the games more than doubled their assessment game scores. Like, in terms of when we assess their knowledge of their risk to abuse before they played the games, it was very low in terms of they didn't realise that it was wrong for someone to touch them. They didn't realise that it's wrong for someone to say, keep a secret. They didn't realise that it was wrong for somebody to say, send me a photograph online, email me a picture of yourself naked, whatever. And yet after they played the games, they realised that isn't the way to do things. That isn't right. I have a right to say no to this, and so on. And what was interesting from the evaluations that have taken place is that children have been found to apply their learning to unprompted experiences and so on, like I remember when somebody asked me that, or somebody touched me inappropriately there, or somebody wanted to take a photograph of me naked and all the rest of it. Suddenly, and interestingly, we were sort of overwhelmed with experience. You know, this had happened, that had happened, and so on. There is evidence that this approach really was working. What we also found was that sessions could be delivered by teachers and non-teachers, because invariably we deliver the DeafKidz Defenders session in school settings. And whereas at the beginning we started off thinking that teachers should deliver this content, we actually found that anybody can deliver it. And you know, that clearly is useful to us in terms of scaling, getting content out, getting sessions delivered, more and more children engaged. And also what we found was that teachers felt more able to handle disclosures of abuse and more confident at teaching children how to be safe. And if we go back to the early days of DeafKidz and our work in Pakistan, and that came about because I was certainly saying that to be relevant and appropriate to deaf children today, we have to work in the Islamic world. You know, half the world's Islamic. You know, we've got to get in there, we've got to empower and resource deaf children there. And it was so our work in Pakistan has been particularly sensitive because of the cultural challenges there. And what was interesting was that teachers there, through this programme, felt more confident about actually dealing with what's a significantly taboo issue in that community, you know. So that's been the impact of DeafKidz Defenders, and as I said earlier, we're scaling it as a result of the interest, the success that's occurring. DeafKidz Goal is our second key intervention, which is a project based on football to empower deaf young people with essential life skills. The delivery model is around using deaf adults, coaches, to then empower and resource young people that participate in the sessions, the football sessions, to be safe. And the skills sort of develop organically. So it's like, come and play football. You know, the message goes out across the community to the deaf clubs, the deaf groups, through the schools. Come to Slum Soccer and DeafKidz International and play football. Get the gear. It's all branded to DeafKidz. It looks great, you know. Barcelona it's not, but it's still pretty good, you know. And it had significant appeal to young deaf women who just love it. And so that's been significantly successful. Many participants, sort of awareness about how to be safe, how to resist from point of entry. The young girls entering the programme to the point of exit, so to speak. Whew, massive, you know, incremental learning and such like. So we've been really pleased with that, and it's to be scaled across South Africa this year. We've just received the funding announcement from a private foundation, so you know, that's going to grow, and we're certainly keen to try and bring this to the UK if we can. I should also say that DeafKidz Defenders will at some point this year go across the UK in partnership with BATOD, British Association of Teachers of the Deaf, who are great fans of the programme and want to see it introduced into all schools for the deaf here. Our third sort of programmatic intervention globally is DeafKidz Healing, and this is responding to the needs of deaf victims and survivors of abuse. So just to summarise, there's three key work streams that we're pursuing: Defenders, Goal and Healing. And this is about responding to the needs of deaf children that have experienced sexual, physical, emotional abuse and neglect. How do we deal with the trauma? How do we deal with the hurt? How do we recover from that? It's bad enough if you're hearing, but what if you're deaf and you haven't got access to language? If you haven't got interpreters that understand the sign language terminology and vocabulary of abuse, particularly sexual. So this is about creating accessible trauma care pathways, individual and group therapy with deaf children who suffered trauma and abuse. And I can tell you in South Africa, that's children as young as 6, 5, 6, play, you know, safe, soft play. How can we heal, recover from what happened, and look to the future with some hope. Development of accessible therapeutic tools and treatment programs, as I said, using play, using other resources. And lastly, deaf awareness training to professionals who work with child protection, in child protection and in mental health. Again, you know, there are a number of sort of established, proven, recognised providers in South Africa of healing work, but none of them understand deafness, none of them have worked with deaf children, so we're working to empower and resource those organisations to be accessible, to understand, for example, how to use sign language interpreters, to use gesture or such like if the child hasn't acquired language, how to engage with the deaf community and make sure that the family heals as well. But it's not just the child, it's also the family. You know, quite often we've seen guilt at somehow the child experienced abuse under my watch. So how do we, you know, work with that? So DeafKidz Healing is our third key programmatic area, and we're progressing that in South Africa as I speak. Other example programming in India, DeafKidz Go, Jamaica, addressing gender-based violence, particularly against deaf young women. And that there, the image there in the bottom there is, you know, empowering young women to say, you know, you can say no to violence, you can disclose to the police if you are being beaten up at home, and so on. Iraq, we train teachers of the deaf for the British Council, or funded by the British Council for the Iraqi government. South Africa, DeafKidz Defender. Zambia, ear and hearing care, in that the excellent Emma Mackenzie here is, you know, working with us to recycle hearing aids, which then go out to Zambia, where they are well deployed. DeafKidz Defenders into Pakistan and also to Malawi. How do we reduce risk and vulnerability then? We talked about why it occurs, how do we reduce it? So we look to empower, as I said, deaf children to understand, to recognise what abuse is, that actually it is wrong for someone to punch you. It is wrong for somebody to touch you inappropriately. That, you know, being sexted, sent inappropriate texts is abuse. Being just ignored, marginalised, neglected is abuse, and so on. So we spend a lot of time working on that. We work with governments and civil society, decision makers, clinicians, to ensure that they're able to safeguard and protect deaf children, and that the clinical, social welfare and criminal justice needs of the child that's been abused are met. So clinical, when abuse is disclosed, taking the evidence. Social welfare, if the child's been abused, move to a safe house or somewhere that it's safe. Criminal justice, following through the prosecution. That's like ensuring that evidence given in court by the child is given in a safe way, perhaps through two-way mirrors, as they do in Jamaica, or in a special set-aside room, that interpreters understand the language and terminology of the court process and the case itself, and so on. Engagement with the deaf community to ensure our programming, goal, defenders, healing, has authentic deaf community input. And I think, you know, one of the things I say to the deaf community here and elsewhere is, you know, if we as deaf people don't look after deaf children, who will? We all have a responsibility. And sometimes, you know, the abuse within the deaf community is off the scale. And here, you know, the UK is dealing with a massive issue around historical abuse of deaf children in schools for the deaf. And that's, you know, there's a piece of work called the Truth Project, Truth Programme, that's looking at that. And so it may be that some of our healing work comes into the UK. Work to adapt existing programmes to ensure that they're accessible. Proactive use of deaf role models, so our trainers for defenders are deaf role models. The children say, hey, I can be that, I want to be that, all the rest of it. And, you know, an example there is I sat in a room in Pakistan with grandparents, parents with their deaf children, and they said to me, what are these children going to become? What are they ever going to be? And I said, don't stop dreaming, let them be who they want to be, you know? What? You know, let's live some dreams, let's have some hope. And deaf awareness training for those working in child protection and victim response. And an example of sort of working with other agencies is, in Finland there is been a very successful initiative called Protect Us, which is an initiative aimed at responding to the needs of young people who have had sexual images posted online. So, you know, what happens when an image goes online? Who do you speak to? How do you address the nightmare, the embarrassment, the terror of seeing your naked image somewhere online? Protect Us works to address that challenge, counsel, advice, getting the image down, all the rest of it. And we are now looking to make that provision accessible through sign language interpretation on the site, and particular distinct bespoke pathways for deaf children and young people who say, my image has appeared somewhere. And working with an organisation called Embrace, we're looking to bring that into the UK as well. So that's an example of us working with other agencies. And going back to adults with a sexual interest in children, you know, we've been looking to work with the likes of the Lucy Faithfull Foundation to ensure that their Stop It Now programme is inclusive of those deaf adults. Our priorities for the next 3 years are, you know, to continue to deliver DeafKidz Defenders, and in particular to scale into South Africa, Pakistan and Zambia. DeafKidz Goal, to continue to deliver that programme and into South Africa, and DeafKidz Healing, build it across, build those pathways in South Africa, test them, evaluate them, adjust them, scale them. So that's what we're going to be doing for the next 3 years. Look this way. Happy to take any questions.
Yes, does anyone have any questions? Any questions?
I probably don't need a microphone.
Well, it's just for the
Because of
recording.
that, okay. Hi, thanks, Steve. That was really, really interesting. Do you have a target age group of kids that you're trying to sort of approach for this?
No. Egypt, you say?
No, target age group.
Age group, sorry,
yeah.
my mistake. We tend to work from sort of the earliest point that a child can understand life, the world, universe. So it's like 4 or 5 through to sort of 18, thereabouts. And in fact, I was recently in South Africa and sat at the back of one of those rooms, and there was a child in there, 4 years old, had never been to school before. It was his first day at school, sat in the classroom, and Elizabeth was delivering a session on trusted adult. Tell, trusted adult. By the end of 45 minutes, that child, 4 years old, first day at school, was running around going, tell. And I thought, we've got to be doing something right, you know. So 4 to 18, short answer.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And school's the main route of access to the children.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, schools are clearly a multiplier. That's where children come together. But there's also community groups, youth groups, football clubs with DeafKidz Goal. You know, we look to work across them all. But essentially, through the schools, we get reach, we get leverage from parents and also teachers, and we're developing the capacity within that school to actually ensure its children are safe. Because invariably what we have found is that schools don't have child protection policies, don't have teachers with lead responsibility for safeguarding. You'd be quite surprised. So often we're quietly developing with the teachers there and the teams there the capacity of the school to ensure its kids are safe.
That's great. Thank you. It's very inspiring. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Sure.
Thank you. Like Susan, I probably don't need this. So do you work with other NGOs to help identify more generally disabled people who are locked away and are excluded from society?
We will onward refer. So, like, you know, there have been times, and I've seen it myself, where I've been in a geography and within a culture, and the deaf and disabled children are quite honestly locked away.
Yeah.
And yes, we will look to make sure that, you know, the appropriate representations are made, normally to community disability groups.
Yeah.
You know,
okay.
and I think the challenge that we've seen, for example, in Kenya, Malawi, is that NGOs don't, and health authorities, health agencies, don't know how to engage with the disability community.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, they're over there, you're over here, come together, sit round a table, and, you know, actually, this is, you know, the Deaf Association of wherever, this is the Sight Loss Association of wherever, this is the mental health, you know,
Yeah.
you know, and we try and sort of create some brokerage. And there's a lot to be done,
Yeah.
you know, because again, it's not just deafness, other disabilities experience taboo, stigma, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I do a lot of work in South Asia and mobility disability, and we see the same. So they're shunned because of the predominantly Buddhist belief of reincarnation, because they've done something
That's right, yeah.
incorrect in a previous life. And getting access to the right people in those community settings is pivotal to being able to support those communities in changing and in educating them, changing their belief systems a little bit to be able to support those people.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And I think it's about accessing grassroots disability organisations,
Yeah.
you know, which are supported by the likes of Action Disability on Development, you know, who are quite an impactful organisation.
Yeah.
So, you know, we do find ourselves sort of helping to make linkages and so on.
Yeah.
But, you know, clearly our focus is on deafness because it is the least resourced, the least understood, and the most prevalent. And you will all know, you know, in low resource settings, the incidence of deafness is high, poor neonatal health, you know, greater susceptibility to the illnesses that cause deafness and more. Yet half the time, nobody knows what it is, or it's just not appropriately diagnosed.
How do you find the staff
The staff.
to do it? Because even in the UK, we've got social workers who don't know how to use interpreters properly or can't access interpreting services, or sometimes we can't access interpreting services for our own. So how do you have the staff that have got the right sign language from the right country and the additional qualifications of knowing about trauma and all the other stuff?
That's an interesting question. I've never had that one before.
Well, I'm just incredulous about all the work that you're managing to do with.
As you've seen from the video, you know, our staff come from the community, deaf and hearing, working together. We're a total communication organisation. We're about the integration of deaf and hearing, because the deaf community can't survive, doesn't live on its own. The hearing community doesn't live on its own. We've got to forge, you know, joint working. And so that's clearly a sort of a principle for us. So we find the staff, quite honestly, through word of mouth, who we know can deliver it. And, you know, what we find quite often here in the UK is you recruit people in who talk it, don't they, but they can't walk it, you know. No. I mean, generally, like, you know, cut this bit, edit out. You know what it's like, you know. In my day job in the NHS, don't get me started. You know, you hire people in and like, can't do what they said they did. It's difficult, isn't it? But here we've got people that we've known for a while. They're proven. They're known within the community, so they've got.
Excuse my sort of misunderstanding this. So there's a lot of work you're doing within the deaf community, and you've raised the prevalence of deafness. Blindness is also a big thing. I don't know how common being deaf-blind is, but a lot of your solutions are very visual. There's a lot of sign language, there's a lot of video-based solutions. What options are there for people who are deaf-blind, aside from more one-to-one type experiences, and are there gaps there that you're aware of that maybe this wider community could support?
There are gaps, and, you know, we do work with deaf-blind children, And invariably the approach then is a deafblind manual, specific and bespoke to the child. And
Sorry,
also,
can you explain a deafblind manual? Is that I'm not aware of what that is. Sorry.
okay, how do I explain that, Helen? It's
like feeling this
So manual is in touching, so tactile.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that makes sense.
Can I borrow your hand? just put it out. I'm going to touch you, okay? Right. So hello. How are you? So like, you know, a manual, deafblind manual communication like that.
Yeah.
And what we've also found is that deafblind children invariably have some degree of sight. It's rare that you find it totally, you know, experiencing total sight loss. So we'll be able to do some sort of bespoke interpretation with them. But what was interesting is that Nick Sturley, the guy who had full disclosure of his name, it's in the public domain, 10,000 images, you know, he was deafblind. Yet he could see enough to know what he was doing. And so there's clearly a risk within that community, you know, and clearly a vulnerability, and we will work to address it. And we do encounter it, and we do respond to it through sort of deafblind manual, appropriate in the appropriate sign language and deafblind manual language, and also, you know, that bespoke sort of training, so to speak, as mentioned.
Yeah. And can I just, how common is deafblindness, or is it quite uncommon compared to deafness or blindness?
I'd need to check the numbers.
Yeah.
I'm full up on deafness, on the incidence of deafness, but yeah, again, you know, in low resource settings, it will be higher than here, for example. Anyone got the stats? No.
No. Thank you.
I will find out and email it back to you. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So you talked about this whole journey started from your journey, and then you started engaging with identifying kids who are being abused, and then you went to Africa, identified this, you did a bit of research. Now, in all of your presentation, you talked about the team delivered certain things and did the training, but what I wasn't seeing, but I could see in your slide that you had the law enforcement giving the training. So how would you bring all the stakeholders in the same understanding that educate them first, and also see if they see the problem the way that you see? So
that's a good point. So thank you for that. So if I go back to what happened way back, initial proposal into comic relief, full disclosure here, it's all in the accounts, 10,000 to do a bit of research into the abuse and exploitation of deaf children in South Africa. That looked at in that research the criminal justice response. There was none. There was no police officers with any understanding of deafness, no with any sign language skills and such like. When that report went back to comic relief, they said, here's 250,000.
Wise that would be extremely useful for your work and could help children. What would that be? So what do you think? What if you can dream about anything, you know, magic device or that extremely useful?
I guess 3 pieces of technology or an integrated capability that does one. First of all, relays in digital form, shape, to deaf children and young people that it's okay to be deaf. You know, you can have a positive identity as a young deaf person. You can be who you want to be. It's a positive stuff. You know, you're a hero, be one. The second part of the technology I would wish is a global firewall that protects deaf children and young people from grooming, sort of bullying, online abuse, so to speak. And then lastly, a capability that says to adults that want to perpetrate sexual acts, sexual offences on children, that you can change, you can stop it, You know, this is solvable. And I think one of the emerging tracks for deaf kids is we do have to work in prevention. You know, the sexual abuse of deaf children can be prevented. You know, if you look at the programming that some agencies are using at the moment, sort of saying to young, you know, to adults, you know, why are you doing this? You can change it. And we can look at that and we can work at it. I think we have to embrace that. Otherwise, it just becomes a repetitive circle that we don't break.
Yeah.
And of course, that includes women as well. Women also perpetrate sexual acts on children. So we need to include adults in a global sense. So my wish technology would be that three-part capability, you know.
Thank you. Yeah, because we come from medical technology, so we are going to put in our list and then probably we think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I have it by next week, please?
Yeah, okay, perfect.
Don't dilly-dally, you know.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, well, as you could probably hear, the food and drinks are here. So we have pizzas and beers and all sorts of non-alcoholic stuff as well. So that's what we'll be doing next. But before then, another thank you to Steve.
Thank you. Same time next year. No, I'll get you someone else. You know, brilliant. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.